Good morning, everybody. Buenos días. So I hope you're enjoying the temperatures in Washington, D.C., Alaskan style. Not. Trying to kill time here. I do hope that you enjoyed the reception last night, courtesy of the Alaska State Society. Yeah. I believe we do have some of the technical issues under control this morning. The program should follow much more smoothly than yesterday morning. And I believe we are ready to start with the first speaker of the morning. It's going to be Dr. Martin Jeffries, presently Director of Polar Sciences, Office of Science and Technology Policy, Executive Office of the President. And he's going to be talking to us about the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee and the Arctic Executive Steering Committee, Marine and Maritime Issues.
Thank you, Pablo. I stood here 10 years ago, same meeting, and I was representing the National Science Foundation at the time, where I was Program Director for the Arctic Observing Network, and I talked about our early efforts to initiate that program. It's good to be back 10 years later, this time representing the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the Executive Office of the President. Thanks to the organizers, particularly John and Pablo, for the invitation to speak. I've been at OSTP for 16 months. I began on the 29th of February last year. When OSTP asked me, when would you like to begin, I chose the 29th of February. You can't do that every year. So it's a date you don't tend to forget. Let's see if I've got the controls under control. So the United States is an Arctic nation. It says so in National Security Presidential Directive and Homeland Security Presidential Directive that was issued on the 9th of January 2009. I'll summarize the policy in a moment, but first let's take a look at why the United States is an Arctic nation. We have what you might call the legislated Arctic that was defined by the Arctic Research and Policy Act of 1984, and that's what is illustrated here. And you saw this map more than once yesterday. There are other ways to define the Arctic Circle, the Arctic watershed, the tree line, permafrost, and so on. But this is one particular Arctic you will see defined fairly often, but the fact remains is we are an Arctic nation because of Alaska. The 49th state, as you heard from Admiral Tukumpt yesterday, purchased from Russia in 1867 for what now looks like a very small sum of money. And as he said, as the Admiral said yesterday, it quickly became known as Seward's Folly, because no one thought, why would the United States want such a distant, cold place? But it ceased to look foolish in 1968, only 9 years after statehood, when oil, very large amounts of oil and gas, were discovered at Prudhoe Bay on the North Slope. Right there. And I don't have Parkinson's. So, as I say, the Arctic can be defined in a number of different ways, but no matter how you define it, the United States is an Arctic nation. As I say, defined in the Arctic Research and Policy Act, which, more importantly than the legislated Arctic that it defined, it created the U.S. Arctic Research Commission and the U.S. Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee. I'll say more about those two organizations in a moment, but let's return to the Arctic region policy. The policy is 10 pages long. If you wish to see the entire policy document, it's available online. I will summarize it as it is summarized here on the screen by these 6 points. Meet national security and homeland security needs, protect the Arctic environment, conserve its biological resources, ensure that natural resource management and economic development are environmentally sustainable, strengthen institutions for cooperation in the Arctic, particularly the Arctic Council, which, as you know, the United States chaired until recently when it handed over the chairmanship to Finland in mid-May in Fairbanks, Alaska. Number 5 is involve the Arctic's indigenous communities in decisions that affect them. I think yesterday quite a number of speakers mentioned the importance of the people of the Arctic to our endeavors. And finally, enhance scientific monitoring and research into local, regional, and global environmental issues. The Arctic Region policy also states that the Arctic region, and this is relevant to this conference, this is why I mention it, the Arctic region is primarily a maritime domain. And Section F of the policy states that United States priorities for maritime transportation in the Arctic region are facilitate safe, secure, and reliable navigation, protect maritime commerce, and protect the environment. So I mentioned that the Arctic Research and Policy Act of 1984 created 2 organizations, the United States Arctic Research Commission, and you heard from Fran Ulmer, the chair of the commission, yesterday morning. The commission has 8 presidentially appointed commissioners, plus the director of the National Science Foundation, currently Dr. Franz Cordova. And the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee, IARPC for short, from now on, has 10 core agencies and any other additional agencies as appropriate or necessary. And it is chaired by the National Science Foundation. At the risk of oversimplifying the Act, it requires the Arctic Research Commission to produce an annual goals and objectives report. Think of it as advice to the President and to Congress, based on consultations with a broad range of stakeholders that include federal departments and agencies, the state of Alaska, Alaska Natives and Native organizations, academia, NGOs, and the private sector. IARPC then considers those goals and objectives and prepares a 5-year plan, the Arctic Research Plan, also in consultation with a broad range of stakeholders. And the plan is, under the law, to be updated every 2 years. IARPC has been a subcommittee of the National Science and Technology Council in OSTP, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, since 2011. This was an important moment because it was the catalyst for IARPC to prepare and implement the first ever comprehensive Arctic research plan. That covered the period 2013 through 2017. It was released in February 13 and implementation was completed in December of 2016. The second comprehensive Arctic research plan covering the period 2017 through 2021 was released in mid-December 2016. The second plan has 9 goals. The topics of those goals are shown here. Each goal has a number of research objectives and performance elements. In the entire plan, there are 34 research objectives and 123 performance elements. The performance elements are concrete tasks that we have set ourselves to work on, hopefully complete, to demonstrate progress on the implementation of the plan. Ruth, are you smiling? I just mentioned that word. Elements of each of these goals can be connected to Arctic marine and maritime issues, although some goals have stronger connections than others. But I think I could, if I had time, make a case that each of those goals has a connection to marine and maritime issues. But here are some examples. The obvious one is sea ice, which we all know during the summertime now is receding great distances from the shore, opening up an awful lot of open water. The spatial and temporal variability of sea ice thickness, its extent, particularly in the summer, and its volume are clearly a major concern for marine and maritime activities. Glaciers, ice caps, and the Greenland ice sheet goal, very relevant to marine and maritime activities. You heard David Jackson mention icebergs yesterday, an obvious hazard to navigation. But also ice mass loss from the glaciers and the Greenland ice sheet through iceberg carving and through melting, and how that contributes to rising sea levels, not only in the Arctic but outside the Arctic, where this has implications for ports and harbors and naval installations and so on. And of course, coastal flooding impacts on communities, etc. Speaking of which, Arctic coastal infrastructure and community resilience, and by association, community health and well-being, are affected by accelerated coastal erosion. The latter is exacerbated by warming and thawing permafrost, sea ice retreat and greater open water and wave height. Wave heights are increasing in the Arctic Ocean with the retreat of the ice cover and the greater fetch. And increased storminess and storm surges. All issues relevant to everyone in this room, I would say. Goal number 9, I highlight here, environmental intelligence, which is a combination of observations, data stewardship, data management, and computer modeling, numerical modeling. The purpose of this goal is it addresses the need to expedite timely, reliable, and actionable information to stakeholders by integrating observations with modeling and effective data management. With respect to marine and maritime issues, this might, for example, include Arctic domain awareness. That's an observing issue. And also to environmental forecasting, weather, water, and sea ice, as you heard yesterday from Noaa. And all this information can enhance decision support. IARPIC fosters collaborations among United States researchers and others, those numerous stakeholders I mentioned earlier, the state of Alaska, Alaska Natives, Alaska Native organizations, academia, and so on. And between the United States and overseas researchers. The implementation of the first Arctic Research Plan realized the creation of IARPIC collaborations. It's both a platform and a practice. The platform is the website, which is more than a website. It's really a science social media platform where information is shared, new ideas are generated, progress is reported on those performance elements, and collaborations are fostered. The practice is US federal government researchers, program officers, and others, the feds, and non-feds, including overseas participants, working together to address hard problems through collaboration. Currently, IARPIC Collaborations has about 1,300 members, about 10% are from overseas. Since the preparation of the first Arctic Research Plan and the launch of IARPIC Collaborations, there's been an unprecedented degree of scientific conversation, cooperation, coordination, and collaboration, the 4 Cs, among US government departments and agencies, and between them and the broader research and related community outside of the federal government. I invite you to go to IARPIC Collaborations, to learn about IARPIC and the Arctic Research Plan, and become a member if you aren't already a member. Get involved. It's easy to do. You just click at the top right-hand corner of the website, and membership will be almost instant. Now I'll turn to the Arctic Executive Steering Committee, the AESC. You heard Admiral Allen briefly refer to the AESC yesterday. It was created in 2015, and the AESC provides guidance to executive departments and agencies and coordinates efforts to implement the priorities, objectives, activities, and responsibilities identified in NSPD 66 and HSPD 25, the Arctic Region Policy, the national strategy for the Arctic region, and related agency plans. Where applicable, and this will sound familiar, the AESC works with State of Alaska, local and Alaska Native tribal governments, and similar Alaska Native organizations, academic and research institutions, and private and non-profit sectors. I've already given a brief description of NSPD 66, HSPD 25. Before I say a few words about the national strategy for the Arctic region, let me just draw your attention to 5 working groups that focus on particular high priority issues. Those are groups addressing issues related to Alaska Natives and Native organizations, the people who live in the Arctic, who make it their home, community resilience, also very much related to the people who live in the Arctic, an energy working group, which I think should be energy and power, but that might be my misunderstanding, the Arctic Digital Elevation Model, the Arctic DEM as it's sometimes called, and the Arctic Science Ministerial. I don't reboot very well.
There we go. Afraid that might happen.
Thank you. The National Strategy for the Arctic Region was released in May 2013. It has 3 lines of effort you see here: advance United States security interests, pursue responsible Arctic region stewardship, and strengthen international collaboration. Note the 4 guiding principles: safeguard peace and stability, make decisions using the best available information. We heard that from Admiral Sukumt yesterday also. Pursue innovative arrangements and coordinate and consult with Alaska Natives. If you're getting a sense of the importance of our work in relation to the people of the Arctic, that's what point I'm trying to get across. I was at a meeting at the Wilson Center about 3 weeks ago, the Arctic Circle Forum, and a Norwegian member of parliament was on a panel, and he made a very interesting comment. He said, I go to so many talks where you see ships and landscapes and animals and so on, but no one ever puts a picture of the people of the Arctic in there. And I think we should never forget that there are people who live in the Arctic. It is their home. Each line of effort has a number of objectives. There are 11 in total, as you see here. I won't read them to you. Let me give you some examples of activities and accomplishments under these objectives, things that have been achieved so far. Okay. It stopped advancing.
All right.
So the Committee for the Maritime Transportation System has been very busy addressing objectives in the National Strategy for the Arctic region, and they've prepared and released 3 reports so far. Helen Brohl, who is the Executive Director of the CMTS, she was here yesterday, maybe is here today, and she will be chairing a panel later today. And if you want more information about the CMTS and Arctic work, is it tomorrow? I'm sure she'd be happy to talk to you. Alison Azara was here yesterday. Alison's here, and she has played a big role in this effort too. Thank you, Alison. Arctic domain awareness. The Department of Homeland Security funds the Arctic Domain Awareness Center at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. They have a number of partners in Alaska and elsewhere. Church Key, the Executive Director of ADAC, is here, and I'm sure he would be happy to tell you more about ADAC if you corner him over coffee or whatever. Noaa has an ambitious Arctic navigation agenda, and you heard something about this yesterday from Craig. And You heard from, again, Admiral Tsukamp. He has quite an impact, doesn't he? He talked about the Arctic Coast Guard Forum, that the US Coast Guard is a signatory to and an active member. And the United States and the Arctic Council, as I mentioned earlier, it chaired the Arctic Council from May 2015 through May 2017 and handed over to Finland recently. And I draw your attention to 3 agreements here that have been signed, not during the US chairmanship, not all of them, but 3 agreements signed under the auspices of the Arctic Council that are relevant to marine and maritime issues. I mentioned the Arctic Council Scientific Cooperation Agreement because it is relevant to marine and maritime issues because, as somebody mentioned yesterday, icebreakers are infrastructure, and icebreakers provide access, and infrastructure and access are parts of this science cooperation agreement. I think it's important, or at least I'm going to take advantage of this forum to mention science cooperation in the Arctic. And I'll do that in a moment. Sorry, I'm losing track here. But first, let me link the Arctic Executive Steering Committee to IARPIC. They are not 2 separate bodies working in isolation. The AESC has its 3 lines of effort. The Arctic Research Plan has its goals. What connects them is the objective, the NSAR objective of increased understanding of the Arctic through scientific research and traditional knowledge. And the reporting that IARPIC is required to do annually to the National Science and Technology Council and biennially to Congress, this is our contribution to the reporting on progress on the national strategy for the Arctic region. Scientific research, basic research, fundamental research, curiosity-driven research, call it what you will, also contributes to national security. This picture shows a boy on the ice, and you may say, oh, shrug your shoulders, it's just another boy. And there are many of them out there each year. But that was one of a dozen boys that were deployed by an Office of Naval Research team in the spring of 2014. And they were the surface expression of an underwater acoustic communication and navigation array, part of the marginal ice zone study. And that array was supporting the navigation and communication with underwater sea gliders. They were operating underwater in the open water, and they were operating under the marginal ice zone and the pack ice during the summertime in the Arctic. This was increasing our knowledge and understanding of the ice-ocean system, but it's an ONR project, and it was therefore also contributing to new capabilities, potential capabilities, that the Navy might use in the Arctic in the future. And I come back to international science cooperation. Scientific research also strengthens international cooperation in the Arctic. Here you see scientists from 10 countries who worked aboard the Korean research vessel Araon in the summer of 2014. And there was a group of 6 ONR-supported scientists aboard that ship. I mentioned the Arctic Council Science Cooperation Agreement a moment ago. It exemplifies intergovernmental science cooperation. But international science cooperation frequently originates with the scientists themselves at the grassroots level, if you will. Indeed, I'd say that scientists are expert at developing and executing international collaborations across boundaries and borders, across oceans and continents, and between hemispheres. In so doing, Arctic scientists and the Arctic research community, they practice science diplomacy, sometimes known as soft power or smart power. Science diplomacy is the use of scientific collaborations among nations to address common problems and to build constructive international partnerships. And who do we depend on for those international science collaborations? Scientists, of course. There are no international scientific cooperation. There is no international science cooperation or collaboration without the scientists. That concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. You already cut into Simon's time, but there are a few questions, and at least I want to address one of them. Is there any chance that the current administration will revise the current IRPIC 5-year plan that was released in December, but lasts until 2021?
I do not know if there is a plan currently, but when we prepared the plan, and it's actually written in the plan, that we recognized that there was an impending change of administration and that we would focus on the first 2 years, allowing time for possible changes and updates, which the law requires anyway. Our plan is supposed to be updated every 2 years. So.
And very quickly, who now chairs the AESC, since the president has not yet appointed a science advisor to replace Holden, previous director of OSTP?
The chair of the AESC is the director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and there is not a director at the moment. It's co-chaired by the National Security Council, and there is an executive director who Thad Allen mentioned yesterday was previously Ambassador Mark Brzezinski. He was ambassador to Sweden for a number of years, and I am currently the acting executive director of the AESC.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation as well.
I have